What if the wildest visions of the 1960s weren't fantasy, but prophecy? Back when computers filled entire rooms and rockets were just learning to leave Earth, a handful of filmmakers were already dreaming about the world we live in today. Artificial intelligence, environmental collapse, social control. It was all there, flickering in the grain of old celluloid. So let's rewind to an age of optimism and paranoia and rediscover 15 forgotten sci-fi films that saw 2025 coming long before we did. Number 15, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, 1959. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you're the last person on Earth. That's the chilling setup of The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, a film that hit theaters just before the decade turned. It stars Harry Belafonte as a man trapped in a radioactive disaster who emerges to find New York City completely deserted. He wanders through empty skyscrapers, abandoned subways, and hauntingly silent streets. No zombies, no monsters. Just the echo of civilization itself. At the time, audiences didn't know what to make of it. A black man wandering through a ruined white city, building a new life from the ashes. It was radical for 1959. The film quietly confronted issues of race loneliness and human survival in a way most movies of its era never dared. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about what happens when the world ends, but prejudice doesn't. Looking back, it's eerie how much it predicted our modern anxieties. Isolation, urban emptiness, and the search for connection in a broken world. The haunting images of Belafonte walking alone through New York prefigure everything from pandemic-era lockdowns to the emotional desolation of our tech-driven lives. At its heart, the film asked one piercing question. If humanity started over, would we finally learn from our mistakes? 60-plus years later, that question still feels painfully fresh. Number 14, The Time Machine, 1960. Few films captured the promise and peril of the future, like The Time Machine. Based on H.G. Wells' classic, it sent audiences spinning across centuries, from the industrial smoke of Victorian London to the far future where humanity had split into two species, the gentle Eloi above ground and the monstrous Morlocks below. In 1960, this was dazzling. The special effects, time-lapse sequences of shifting skylines, crumbling buildings, and erupting wars were unlike anything audiences had seen. But beyond the visual magic, the story hit on something deeper, that progress without empathy leads to decay. The Eloi lived in lazy comfort, cared for by machines, while the Morlocks toiled unseen underground. Sound familiar? Today, that divide feels almost prophetic. The film mirrors our modern class gap, automation anxiety, and even the fear of becoming too dependent on technology. When the inventor, played by Rod Taylor, finally sees what humanity has become, his horror isn't at monsters. It's at what comfort has done to our spirit. Critics at the time praised its imagination, but missed its warning. Decades later, it's clear that The Time Machine wasn't predicting a far-off apocalypse. It was warning about complacency. The future it imagined isn't a fantasy. It's the logical endpoint of ignoring the cost of convenience. Sometimes, the scariest thing about time travel isn't what you'll see ahead, it's realizing you're already there. Number 13, The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. Before climate change was a household term, there was The Day the Earth Caught Fire. This British gem starts with something as small as human arrogance and ends with the planet tilting off its axis. The result? Floods, heat waves, and chaos, all caused by global experiments gone wrong. Released in 1961, it blended newsroom realism with science fiction dread. Reporters scramble through a sweltering London as newspapers melt off the presses and the Thames dries up. The tone is matter-of-fact, almost documentary-like, which made the catastrophe feel terrifyingly believable. What's remarkable is how much it mirrors our headlines today. The film captured the fragility of Earth's balance long before climate models or international summits existed. It wasn't the aliens or gadgets that made it futuristic, it was the uncomfortable idea that we might destroy our own home through carelessness. Director Val Guest filmed many scenes under glaring heat lamps to make actors sweat on camera. You can practically feel the suffocating air. Critics called it impossible to forget, and they were right. Its closing image, church bells ringing as the world awaits either salvation or doom, remains one of the most haunting endings in 60s cinema. Back then it felt like fantasy. Now it feels like a weather report. Number 12, The Damned, aka These Are the Damned, 1963. If you ever wondered what government experiments might look like through the lens of early British sci-fi, The Damned is your answer, and it's chillingly ahead of its time. Directed by Joseph Losey, this forgotten masterpiece blends motorcycle gangs, secret military bases, and glowing-eyed children into one strange, unforgettable story. The setup is simple. A tourist stumbles upon a seaside town, hiding a secret. Beneath the cliffs lies a bunker where children are being raised in isolation. They're intelligent, polite, and radioactive, created to survive a future world poisoned by humanity's mistakes. When it premiered in 1963, audiences were baffled. Was it horror, political allegory, social commentary? It was all of the above. Beneath the pulp movie's surface lay a stark warning about what happens when fear replaces compassion. The children untouched by the outside world become both victims and symbols of a future we can't control. Today, its message rings louder than ever: artificial enhancement, isolation, and experimentation. In the name of progress, these are headlines, not fiction. The film predicted a world where humanity tries to engineer its own survival only to lose its soul in the process. It's poetic and eerie that a movie once dismissed as too weird now feels like a mirror reflecting our present. The Damned wasn't just strange, it was prophetic. Number 11. The Mind Benders, 1963. Long before scientists began mapping the brain in glowing color, the Mind Benders explored what happens when we try to rewire it. Directed by Basil Dearden, this sleek British thriller begins with a mysterious death and spirals into an experiment that blurs the line between science and morality. A university professor subjects himself to sensory deprivation, isolating his mind completely from external stimuli. The result? Hallucinations, emotional breakdowns, and a terrifying realization that personality itself can be manipulated. It's science fiction stripped of gadgets, just psychology, paranoia, and human fragility. Audiences in 1963 didn't quite know what to make of it. It wasn't flashy like The Time Machine, nor apocalyptic like The Day the Earth Caught Fire. Instead, it peered inward, exploring how easily trust and memory can be bent. The tension was intimate, the stakes personal. Watching it now, the film feels shockingly modern. Its questions about brain manipulation, psychological warfare, and identity resonate in a world of data tracking and mental conditioning through screens. When the protagonist realizes his thoughts may no longer be his own, the chill runs deeper than any alien invasion could deliver. Critics at the time called it quietly unnerving. That's the perfect phrase. The Mindbenders didn't predict the future with gadgets or spaceships. It did it with silence. A silence that feels eerily like the one between our scrolling thumbs today. Number 10. Children of the Damned, 1964. The sequel to Village of the Damned could have been a cash grab. Instead, it turned into a startling parable about control intelligence and fear of the unknown. Released in 1964, Children of the Damned told the story of 6 gifted children born across the world, each with extraordinary mental abilities and an eerie calm that unsettled the adults around them. Rather than paint them as villains, the film made a daring choice. These children weren't evil, they were misunderstood. Governments saw them as threats, scientists as experiments, and the public as something to fear. The children, meanwhile, simply wanted to live in peace. In the middle of the Cold War, that message was bold. It hinted at a world terrified of what it didn't understand, a world not unlike ours. The film's imagery of global powers uniting against a common other mirrors our current anxieties about artificial intelligence, superintelligence, and the unknown capabilities we're creating. Shot in stark black and white, the film's tone is somber and intellectual, its pacing deliberate. There are no monsters, no explosions, just the slow tightening of fear. The final scenes where the children's calm defiance turns into tragedy remain some of the most haunting in British cinema. Today, Children of the Damned feels like a forgotten warning wrapped in a ghost story. It predicted the day we'd build our own super children, not born of mystery, but of code. Number 9. The Earth Dies Screaming, 1964. If you've ever wanted to see what the end of humanity might actually look like, quiet, eerie, and deeply lonely, The Earth Dies Screaming delivers exactly that. Directed by Terence Fisher, best known for his gothic horror work, this compact British sci-fi film opens on a chilling note. Trains derail cars, crash, and people suddenly drop dead in the streets. Only a handful survive, and none of them know why. What follows isn't chaos, it's silence. A few dazed survivors gather in a small English town, trying to piece together what happened. Then the truth begins to surface. towering robotic figures patrol the streets, collecting bodies, while the dead mysteriously return under strange control. At barely over an hour long, the movie moves like a nightmare. There are no massive explosions, no world-saving scientists, no grand speeches. Just survival suspicion and the uneasy question of whether humanity deserves to continue at all. In 1964, audiences expecting another pulp invasion flick were shocked by its restraint. The robots weren't there to thrill, they were there to unsettle. The film's minimalism made it hauntingly real, as though the world ended quietly while no one was paying attention. Today, it feels like a warning for our own times. A society numbed by convenience, too distracted to notice its own undoing. The eerie calm, the faceless machines, and the small frightened survivors all feel like metaphors for the modern world's dependence on automation. The Earth dies. Screaming didn't need grand spectacle to predict the future. It just showed a world that kept going after humanity forgot how to live. Number 8. Alphaville, 1965. Now, this one didn't need flying saucers or laser guns to predict the future, it just needed a computer. Jean-Luc Godard's Alphaville is a noir detective story set in a city run by logic, where love and poetry are outlawed, and every citizen obeys a cold, artificial intelligence called Alpha 60. Filmed entirely in real Paris, the city itself becomes the futuristic landscape. No special effects, no futuristic buildings, just the idea that the future is already here, hidden in plain sight. The hero Lemmy Caution is a secret agent who arrives to investigate the disappearance of a scientist. But instead of finding adventure, he discovers a society where emotion is treated like a virus, and free will has vanished beneath the weight of logic. In 1965, it was considered bizarre. Critics were split, some called it genius, others called it gibberish. But over time, Alphaville revealed itself as one of the most eerily accurate sci-fi predictions of all time. It foresaw surveillance culture, algorithmic control, and the slow erasure of human feeling under the rule of technology. Alpha 60, the droning machine that governs the city, speaks in monotone riddles that sound disturbingly like early computer speech. And its philosophy, efficiency over empathy. Sound familiar? Decades later, Alphaville feels less like a fantasy, and more like an instruction manual we accidentally followed. The film predicted that the biggest danger to humanity wouldn't come from invaders, it would come from our own obsession with perfection. Sometimes, the most chilling dystopias don't happen in the future, they happen when the present forgets how to feel. Number 7. The 10th Victim, 1965. Before reality shows, influencer culture, or viral fame, there was The 10th Victim, a film that saw where entertainment was headed long before social media even existed. Directed by Elio Petri, and starring Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress, this Italian satire imagined a near-future society where people relieve their violent urges through a televised contest. Hunters and victims are paired up and broadcast for public amusement. At first glance, it looks like pulp entertainment, colorful, campy, and wild. But underneath the absurdity lies a biting critique of consumer culture and desensitization. The game's winners become celebrities, products are branded with their faces, and society treats human lives like game scores. When it premiered in 1965, it was considered too strange, too cynical, and too ahead of its time. Yet decades later, it feels prophetic. The movie predicted competitive reality, TV influencer obsession, and the public's fascination with spectacle over empathy. Even its bright, mod aesthetics look eerily similar to today's curated online perfection. What makes The 10th Victim so powerful isn't just its satire, it's the way it predicted how entertainment and morality would collide. The question it asks still lingers. What happens when society turns survival into a show? Modern audiences rediscovering it today might laugh at its retro style, but the unease underneath that laughter is the point. The 10th Victim warned us that one day people would do anything for views, and here we are. Number 6. Seconds, 1966. If The Twilight Zone had a feature-length cousin, it would be Seconds. Directed by John Frankenheimer, this eerie American film tells the story of a middle-aged banker who's given the chance to start life over literally. A secret organization offers him a new identity, new face, and new body, courtesy of plastic surgery and a faked death. He becomes a younger man played by Rock Hudson, and at first, it's paradise. Youth restored freedom, regained regrets, erased. But as he adjusts to his new life, he begins to realize something horrifying. Identity isn't skin deep, and happiness can't be manufactured. When Seconds hit theaters in 1966, audiences were stunned. Critics were confused by its grim tone and surreal camera work. Some even walked out. It was too strange, too introspective, and far too unsettling for a decade that loved bright, shiny visions of the future. But time has been kind to it. The film's themes, cosmetic reinvention, corporate control, and the loss of individuality feel tailor-made for the 21st century. Today, when people can alter their appearances with filters and reinvent themselves online, Seconds feels less like science fiction and more like social commentary that came 50 years early. Frankenheimer shot the film in distorted angles and harsh close-ups, trapping viewers inside the protagonist's crumbling sanity. By the end, Seconds leaves you with one haunting idea. You can change your face, your name, and your past, but you can't escape yourself. In a world obsessed with reinvention, that might be the most terrifying prediction of all. Number 5. Fahrenheit 451, 1966. Books banned, ideas outlawed, and people distracted by endless screens. No, that's not a headline, it's Fahrenheit 451, directed by François Truffaut. This adaptation of Ray Bradbury's novel imagined a society where firemen don't put out fires, they start them burning books to keep people from thinking too much. In 1966, this was bold, even shocking. The film's clean, quiet suburbs look idyllic, but underneath lies a chilling emptiness. Citizens spend their days hypnotized by wall-sized screens and meaningless entertainment. Reading is forbidden, because it makes people question things. The result? A world that looks calm on the outside, but hollow within. Truffaut's direction turned Bradbury's warnings into images that still hit hard. Piles of books curling into ash, silent neighborhoods glowing under artificial light, and one man's desperate rebellion against enforced ignorance. At the time, critics were divided. Some found it slow and strange. Others saw its brilliance. But few realized how prophetic it would become. It foresaw a future where technology isolates rather than connects, and where distraction replaces knowledge. Sound familiar? Today, when people scroll endlessly through empty feeds instead of turning pages, Fahrenheit 451 feels less like a warning and more like a mirror. It predicted the age when comfort would quietly become control, and thinking for yourself would be the rarest act of all. In the end, its message is simple but urgent. Once you stop asking questions, you stop being free. Number 4. The Power, 1968. What if someone among us had the ability to control your thoughts and you'd never even know it? That's the eerie premise of The Power, a film that crept quietly into theaters in 1968 and has aged into one of the decade's most haunting predictions of the modern world. Directed by Byron Haskin and starring George Hamilton, it begins as a mystery about a scientist found dead under bizarre circumstances, but quickly transforms into a psychological cat-and-mouse game about human potential pushed too far. A group of researchers discover that one of their own may have evolved beyond normal human limits. He can control others' actions, warp reality, and manipulate minds without a trace. But who is he? The film unfolds as a paranoia-driven thriller where suspicion infects every scene. The smallest gesture, a raised eyebrow, a smile, could mean someone's inside your head. Audiences in 1968 weren't sure what to make of it. Was it horror, science fiction, a metaphor? It was all three. Beneath its pulpy premise, The Power hinted at ideas that now feel uncomfortably real. Invisible influence, unseen manipulation, and the terrifying fragility of free will in an age of psychological control. Today, in a world shaped by algorithms, social manipulation, and digital suggestion, The Power feels prophetic. The villain doesn't need gadgets or armies, he only needs access to your mind. It's the perfect reminder that the scariest science fiction is the kind that hides in plain sight. Number 3. Charlie, 1968. Few films of the 60s captured the collision between human vulnerability and scientific ambition quite like Charlie. Based on Daniel Keyes' novel Flowers for Algernon, it tells the heartbreaking story of a kind-hearted man with a limited intellect who undergoes an experimental procedure that drastically increases his intelligence. At first, it feels like a miracle. Charlie, played with breathtaking depth by Cliff Robertson, begins solving complex problems, understanding art, and experiencing emotion with newfound clarity. But soon, the brilliance turns fragile. The higher he climbs, the more he sees of humanity's cruelty, isolation, and pride. And as his gift begins to fade, the story transforms into a meditation on what it truly means to be human. When Charlie premiered in 1968, audiences were shaken. Robertson's performance won him the Academy Award, yet the movie itself was largely forgotten by later generations. But its predictions echo through modern science, genetic editing, brain enhancement, and the moral cost of playing with intelligence. Unlike most sci-fi of the era, Charlie isn't about machines, it's about empathy. The experiment isn't just scientific, it's emotional. The film dared to ask whether knowledge without compassion is progress at all. In a world racing toward artificial intelligence and neurotechnology, Charlie remains a quiet warning wrapped in heartbreak. The future it suggests might make us smarter, but will it make us better? Number 2. The Illustrated Man, 1969. Before cinematic universes were even a concept, The Illustrated Man wove multiple futures into one. Based on Ray Bradbury's collection of stories, it stars Rod Steiger as a drifter-covered head, to toe in tattoos, each one a living picture that moves and tells a different story. As the camera lingers on his skin, entire worlds unfold. Dystopian families, mechanical children, artificial paradise, and a planet where compassion itself becomes extinct. Released in 1969, it was too strange for mainstream audiences. Critics called it uneven, even confusing. But what they missed was how prophetic it truly was. Each story quietly predicted modern dilemmas, climate collapse, virtual simulation, and our uneasy relationship with technology that mirrors emotion but lacks soul. The film's visuals were hauntingly surreal, blending fantasy with melancholy realism. The stories didn't shout, they whispered. And what they whispered was unsettling, that humanity's creations, once unleashed, would outgrow our control. Looking back, The Illustrated Man feels like a time capsule of warnings that we ignored. Its stories about mechanical parents and artificial empathy read like previews of modern AI companions and digital substitutes for love. Bradbury's imagination saw the future not as progress, but as a mirror reflecting our detachment. Every tattoo on The Illustrated Man tells the same truth. Our future may already be written on our skin. We just refuse to read it. Number 1. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. Prototype Roots. Though its cinematic debut came a year after the decade ended, The Andromeda Strain grew out of ideas developed in the mid-60s, and it stands as one of the most eerily accurate predictions of the modern age. Based on Michael Crichton's early work, the story follows a group of scientists racing to contain a mysterious microorganism brought back from space. Quarantines containment suits, sterile laboratories. It all feels familiar now, but in 1966, when the concept first circulated, it was pure imagination. What made the film so groundbreaking wasn't just its clinical realism, it was its recognition of human error. Machines malfunction, scientists argue, and the supposed brilliance of human systems begins to crumble under pressure. The story's tension comes not from monsters, but from mistakes. Audiences in the early 70s weren't prepared for how plausible it felt. There were no evil villains, just ordinary people facing extraordinary consequences of their own ambition. The film's cold precision, multi-screen visuals, and step-by-step procedural pacing influenced decades of thrillers to come. Today, The Andromeda Strain feels almost predictive of the 21st century. Biological containment, global fear, and the fragile balance between science and responsibility. It wasn't warning us about aliens, it was warning us about ourselves. The 60s dreamed big, and sometimes those dreams came true in ways no one expected. From AI overlords to quiet apocalypses, these films didn't just imagine the future, they diagnosed it. What we call science fiction, they called caution. So which of these forgotten visions do you think got 2025 right? Drop your thoughts below, share this video with your fellow time travelers, and remember, the future was never ahead of us, it was already being filmed.